In our Data Masterclass series, data leaders share their unique stories. We're happy to welcome back Clemence Chee, Global Senior Director at HelloFresh, and Robin Jose, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at WeFox. Our discussion takes us through all aspects of data as a product and what we learned from applying the concept in practice. Let us welcome your host, Alex Borer.
We are going to cover a really exciting topic, I think, that is very, very relevant for all data leaders out there at the moment, which is data as a product. And I guess it's probably interesting to maybe start off with, how do you think data management has evolved over the last few years, that brought us to the point to think of data as a product? Who would like to start?
I would definitely say Clemens should go first because he was so passionate about this topic when we started talking.
Let me, from my perspective, I'm really interested in your experience because you have seen so much already, Robin. For me, I just know data management or handling data product from the last 5-7 years, basically. And I see how data, especially data management, evolved from master data management, for example, into a more global approach or a more decentralized approach.
And wider approach.
Which touches a lot of businesses. So before we were talking about how data starts to influence more different domains in the organization. And this is where, of course, then data management or data products now actually expands much more. And instead of having centralized master data management, for example, where everybody maybe requests access to a central point, central access, people are now more enabled. They are more educated. They have more tools as well to either produce data or to consume data in the different domains. Yes. I think this is really good. This
across the organization.
Yes, it drives more innovation. It drives more creativity. But on the other hand, it makes our lives a bit harder as well as data leaders. When we not only go for reactive data, not only reacting on data problems, but also have to solve more challenges today around governance, for example, around access management, around protecting data. So this is, I would say, it's on one side very, very beautiful to see how more data is being consumed and produced. On the other side, it's just more challenging.
And I think, that also, if you reflect upon how data management has evolved, we were starting off with very constrained and very much protected data warehouses that were built up centrally to collect from different operational data stores, to put things into those central data stores by those experts in the middle of the company that would basically had to work across all these repositories. And of course, not all of them, because it would have been not feasible. They just worked with selected ones that were needed for financial reporting and so on. And when big data came, we started to put all data into a data lake, but it was not truly democratized because you needed special skills to work with the data. And I think even more importantly, you needed to understand that data, and just by throwing it into the lake doesn't mean you can use it because you don't know what's inside. And I think that's a huge barrier in data management. So we sort of came to a point, I think, throughout the last years that neither of these approaches really work. Data warehouses do work when you can really do it in a defined scope and limit that scope and reduce that scope, really to boil it down to a few things that are truly important. But it also sort of kills the speed of any other person wanting to do something with data. While data lakes sort of unleash that speed, but not really, because you cannot use data at scale, because people don't know what's inside, because people need those special skills. So I think this leads us to data as a product, in my point of view right now. And that's why it's so powerful, because now we start to think about how can we share data at scale with each other so everyone can leverage that, at the same time reducing the barrier in terms of understandability and usability for an average engineer, for an average analyst, for maybe even an average business person. I know that's sort of the things I have started to observe. Robin, what do you think? How do you see that paradigm coming?
Exactly like you said. So, traditionally, the approach has always been, let's say I want to generate some value from the data, right? How do I go and approach it? Traditionally, there's two approaches to it. Right? The first one is what we call as a grassroots approach, or kind of like a line of business kind of approach, where a line of business goes and, let's say, marketing or finance or something like that. So they go and say, we need to now improve our CAC, the cost of acquiring customers, of lifetime value. We do this calculation better. Hence, let me build a data warehouse, something like that, and then eventually build some AI models on top of that to really calculate this. So this is one approach. And the problem with this approach is that you now have 5 line of businesses building individual such data products or data applications. It's very difficult to connect them together. There's a lot of duplication of work, and there's a lot of frustration when you want everything to be in a way that other people can also use it, because you never designed this to be used across by people in the company. The other approach, of course, is a big bang approach. So this is the classic data lake thing where put everything into the data lake. And here, everyone realizes, and this is one of the mistakes I mentioned that in the past, is that you start thinking from the perspective of, okay, let me collect all the data and then define the use cases. And then you realize that once you start defining the use cases, I've not really collected data to take care of these use cases. So in some way, when they came up with this concept of data products, they mentioned that start thinking about your archetypes of usage, right? And when you create those archetypes of usage, which usually they mention about 5 of them, and when they say reporting is one, right? Doing advanced analytics on the customer could be one. It really depends on your
planning
type of company. Yeah, planning potentially. Financial reporting could be one.
Right.
And then you start defining that if everyone in the company have to have this access in some way or the other, marketing would need it to really understand what kind of customer lifetime value is, for example, in terms of customer, right? Sales might look at it in the sense of what's the next best offer that I can give to the customer. A customer support person might want to understand from the perspective of this customer, what problem did she have in the past, or what's her good experiences, what's NPS and stuff like this. So now you really start thinking about customer or customer insights as a data product. So you really change the ball game from the perspective of let me collect all the data and let's make it accessible to people, to the perspective of customer is a data product. Yes. And then I want to provide everyone the accessibility as well as approachability to this data product. And then everything that goes with, and the challenges that we had in the past of things like documentation is not available, the data is not discoverable, right? The data is not of good quality, automatically gets resolved because you start thinking of this is a product. How do I secure the product? How do I provide access to the product? How do I know that my internal customers who's going to use this product is excited about it? So I think that's a fantastic approach. I started looking at myself from my teams, and we are very excited about the direction that it's going.
I am equally excited. I guess the question is maybe for a lot of data leaders, but also maybe for a lot of business folks out there. Why should I even start looking at data as a product? I mean, we've been through so many paradigms. Why cannot I just wait for the next paradigm to come? Because there will be certainly a new paradigm in 2 years' time. What do you think makes this a little bit special? Why do you think this is really something worth investing?
It's not new. It's just sold differently. Just use different terms for it. For example, if I describe, and I thought about what you just said, Robin, right? And I think about the supply chain of data, which is the life cycle of data. I thought about, for example, this beautiful cup here with the ginger tea. This is one. I'm now at the last of the life cycle, and I have this product in front of me, right? But all the different steps before, from when the ginger, for example, was harvested, exactly, until it got into the supermarket, until it gets, until you bought it, and you get it here. It could have ended up become a gingerbread, not a ginger tea, right? So those are different situations in this life cycle of data where it is very, very important to understand. You mentioned the purpose, for example, of the data or this product, and to communicate that. Because if I go to the supermarket now and I'm picking some ginger, I see some data about the ginger and I see what it comes from. I see maybe the price. I can compare. I understand this is for what I want to do, the right purpose. I only know what I want to do, but the future, especially in the organization, is people should communicate about that, what they want to do. For me, this is then having more transparency on this life cycle of data, and having data contracts per se in place
along the value chain.
Along the value chain, yeah. So
right.
I believe that 2023 become a much stronger year for data contracts.
Yeah.
Because with the data contracts, you're able to identify the need for data quality, and you can only do AI with better data quality, right? So
you can do bad AI.
You can do bad AI, yes.
It's still AI.
Yeah.
But I think that this term of data contract is a very important one. And could you describe how would you approach data contracts? I mean, who's doing a contract? Why? What could be ways to approach data contracts?
It really depends on the maturity level. So we have a contract in the supermarket, like the ginger in the supermarket.
Right.
I go there, I see it, and I pick it, in this exact moment, I have a contract with a supermarket by German law, basically, right? Or if I handshake with somebody, that's also a contract. But you can also code the contract into the code.
Into your CI/CD pipeline potentially.
For example, yeah,
when you gain access to data, or when you share data.
Correct. Yeah. So I would say that the term data contract it's important to understand the concept, but not to pinpoint down on the execution of it.
Right.
Because it really depends on team to team, maturity level, that they understand something differently. Because if I say, Alex, please send me X, Y, Z. Can you do this by 8?
Yeah.
And you ask me, okay, why by 8? I say, oh, maybe I have things to do. We agree on it. That's an agreement. That's somehow a contract as well.
Yeah.
If this matures, we suddenly have a pipeline where you send me an email every day at 8 p.m. At some point, it becomes a part of the feature. At some point, it becomes a part of the product itself.
And it's fascinating because when you look at data in an organization, we always thought that data is, or we thought in the last years that data, it has value because it's so big, because we have so much of it. Now, when you look at the reality in most organizations, or all organizations I know of, there's probably the top 100, top 1,000 data sets that truly matter. And there's a long tail of 20,000 other data sets that maybe matter less. And because it's so easy to produce these days data sets. So I'm wondering, when you look at the top data products, they create value not only in one application, not only for your team. It's really that you need other people's data products to fulfill your job in a business now these days, which means that there's a huge reliance from across the business for a top data product. Now, here we need to probably industrialize the approach for data contracts, and that's what I see currently evolving, that for those top data products, it cannot be, okay, it depends on the maturity of the team, but it needs to be a standardized way, like we do it in a supermarket where there's a law around that, and maybe you need these kind of policies or standard or ways of working for data when they truly matter across the company. What do you think?
Yeah, in the end, as we go on this path of data contracts, data quality is one of the biggest challenges, as we mentioned, that most data teams face. Right? In fact, I think a week back that I put this post on LinkedIn, which said that about 40% of the time of a data engineer, probably more, is spent in fixing the data quality problems. And obviously, we all know that it's garbage in, garbage out, which means that ideally the problem is solved at the source, right? So it's best that the team or the domain which is producing the data is having the ownership of having a good quality product, or good quality data in this case. So there's been moments, especially in the past few years, in terms of going towards that direction. And data measures is one way where we went in that direction, and where we said, for example, that the domains who creates the data owns the data, right? And they have certain contracts or SLAs or whatever you want, which they agree to or abide by in terms of producing this data and sending it to us. I see a lot more focus in this direction, right? In terms of where we are going, of how the producers own and control the quality of this data, and exactly how it's coming to a centralized system or even a decentralized system, along with things such as documentation, including the metadata and the cataloging and everything that comes with it. There still has to be some centralized approach in terms of how this is categorized and discovered, but I think a lot in this case will happen with decentralization.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a platform, isn't it? It's and platform not in a technical term, but really as a business term. You find ways of exchanging things, data products, with each other in a standardized way. Like you have standardized way of consuming apps in your app store. It's sort of in a similar approach. So it's really different to just saying, okay, we have an infrastructure and everyone can use it. But when you share that infrastructure, there are certain ways of working. There are certain rules how we do that. And if that data happens to be very important, it's a top data product, and you have to handle it with special care, and it's monitored, and you are made accountable.
Even more care.
Yes.
Because you always have your ABC products, which are more valuable and having a greater impact than other data assets in the company. So I wouldn't say, you mentioned this before, that the era of big data, and there's a lot of data that can be utilized. I think when it's better to rather specialize and narrow down what data really is important, and really focus on those.
Yeah, fully agree with that. I think that is a major, it's a real shift from big data to lean data.
Yeah.
And even for big algorithms, you need the right kind of data, and the label data is the most important one. We all know it. That's what is used to train the most important factor for a good machine learning algorithm. And I just want to pick up a point that you made with regards to the machine learning teams that are using probably 80% of time preparing data and improving data. Why do they do so? It's very simple. Because once you have your machine learning algorithm in production, you deploy it, and it really determines your customer experience. It determines your product, like your example from our last show, or other things that are really core to your company. You cannot allow those machines to make big mistakes. Mm-hmm. When you price your products, when you recommend things to customers, when you run your own supply organization, you need to have those algorithms doing the right thing. So it's natural that you secure the quality of the input that goes into such system-critical machine learning applications, because it truly matters. It has a really big impact if it's wrong. Now, what happens is, though, when you have several of these in your, and most tech companies, most normal companies these days have several machine learning applications across, so everyone redoes the same data quality work when it's not done at source. So I think here is a big value driver for data as a product or data mesh thinking, because if you start having the people in the domain sharing that data, you do it only once at source. You might still need to, I'm not saying that now as a machine learning team you don't do it at all. There's still maybe a delta left that you still need to do for your own machine learning application. But maybe 50% of that is redone as a platform service for everyone else. I think that's the power of data as a product. And if you consider how many more data applications, AI applications, and simply software using data, leveraging data will be out there, in the upcoming years, how much velocity we have in terms of things coming up, I think this will be more and more important to create those economies of scale for data.
And because we just have technology now at our hands, that everybody can produce data more easily. And, this is basically giving us headaches, but sometimes it's beautiful to see.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, suddenly somebody creates a new model or a new approach or a new analysis which somehow disrupts the business, or like really is strong and automates everything, or gives insights who nobody thought it would be possible. That's also possible.
Yes.
Yeah. So you just enable it a lot.
And I'm wondering, Clemens, you briefly touched when we were drinking a coffee on the topic of how to create policy or standards for data products. What are your first learnings here? On that journey towards data as a product. What kind of standards can help? How hard is it? With which ones would you start personally off?
Very, very hard.
It's a tough journey.
It's a very, very tough journey. I think we went through the 2-year cycle and learned a lot, tried to do the things again. What we did first is to really increase the awareness of the importance of data. I think this was the very, very first beginning. We increased the awareness of how data can really help people and our colleagues to improve on their day-to-day job. Right? For example, you have a analysis to do, you have to copy-paste a lot of different data together. This is a better way of doing it. This is a better way of accessing it, for example. We started there, just very, very simple, identify the biggest pain point in a specific process, identifying that, and then starting to help our colleagues. But realized very quickly that one thing that really massively helped was standardization. Agreeing on particular standards and standardize those things, like a metric or a way of how to ingest data. So we standardized a lot, but then people forgot a lot of things again because we had turnover in the company. So we realized, we have to document this. Document this, of course. Got a catalog, for example. We learned about how to do change management the proper way. So
it was a maturity journey, yeah.
Yes.
As a startup, startup. Sorry for saying that. I mean, scale up or big company that was once a startup. You have to learn along the way, and you start always by doing it simple. But then, when you want to make it sustainable, so other people when they join the company can also adopt that. You have to do certain changes, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So definitely a maturity topic, and maturity always increases in adepts. Yeah? So it was also very hard to communicate this. In the end, we found a way of how to showcase this, to communicate it, to have the right metrics in place, to measure progress as well. But it was very hard in the beginning.
So what could you give some examples in general? That doesn't have to be concrete example, but in general, what kind of metrics would you measure for data products? When is a data product good? When is it healthy?
I can give you my opinion. So when I think about a product and how I envision data as a product in an organization or in the world, I think about eBay, Amazon, Alibaba, because they have a marketplace. What they do is they have a infrastructure in place for everybody to procure, to find, and to sell.
Right.
And they enable everybody to do that. So what is a good product on this platform is when you have a lot of revenue. How do you get revenue? By increased adoption, right? So the final metric would be adoption, because this drives value. But you can always measure, or at least how I see it, what drives the adoption is other things like quality. Robin mentioned a lot of them before. Quality, it's understandability, accessibility, customer service afterwards, a lot of different things, right? So in the end, it's adoption and revenue, like value driver. And how does it link to maybe revenue in the real commercial teams? But there's a lot of things before.
And I fully agree with the list that you explained, and I have the same experience that those are the things that actually drive adoption. And I think what also drives adoption, or at least trustworthiness, and I would say the value for the consumers of data is really also to understand early on when something changes. I think that is something that we have underestimated, I think.
100%. I want to say, when I said eBay or Amazon, like when I envision that marketplace, this is how I go shopping. I say, I want to buy something which has minimum 4.5 stars, and which is, say, below 20 euros, right?
Right.
When I buy something, I buy a t-shirt, I say it needs to be below 20 euros and at least 4.5 stars.
And you have
trust.
Yeah, you want to buy it from somebody who has that rating, is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
It's the trust you have in that data producer and that producer.
Exactly. And then I have the data contract. The contract says delivery in 2 to 3 days. It gives me the metadata of it because I know the t-shirt size, I know the color, I know where it was maybe produced. I can look it up. I know where the company is and so on. So it gives me all the information. That for me is a product. It is a product.
Right.
Somebody maybe use that t-shirt to print a print on it. That's a different product though. Yeah, but it's the same network basically.
Right.
Yeah, and they all have the same standards in the data contract, and they use the product either the same way or differently. Of course, I can still use the ginger for gingerbread or the t-shirt with my design on it to sell it to somebody else. And
I'm thinking also, what I found really provides value is if you see how other people use that data as well. As an inspiration. It's like your cooking inspiration, for ginger. Wonderful. I really love those examples. And Robin, what made you, really start adopting data as a product? Maybe you can tell us, 1 or 2 stories from your life where you said, okay, this is something where I changed my mind, where I think this is something we need.
I think I can connect to exactly what Clemence said some time back. One is adoption, and the second is revenue. Because we said, I guess, in the last episode, that in the end, data, the primary purpose is to produce value.
Right.
And to produce value, of course, there has to be adoption. You can have a great AI model out there, which you think is 99% accuracy or whatever, but as long as somebody doesn't see, as long as you don't see adoption, you get nothing from it. So in the end, for us, when we started looking at it, we were a little bit top down, where we were looking at the use cases, where we would feel like there's going to be maximum adoption, but we also looked at from the perspective of revenue generation, right? So, and it need not be just money centric. And sometimes it's also, as I say, you can be motivated by gain or you can be motivated by pain.
Yes.
And in this case, because we are a regulated industry, we need to start looking at what are the things which must absolutely be there, which if it's not there is going to cause us pain. And one of them was reporting, right? So it's not just reporting that you see in terms of BI dashboards, but also the reporting that you need to start sending back to the regulatory authorities.
Oh, yeah,
and
that's
then you
really
need to do
key.
that, at very regular intervals. So we started with very simple use cases, and then we started, okay, what's most important for us in terms of our value proposition? And the first thing that we said was that, well, we're trying to be this platform for our customers so that they buy something from us and be happy. And then we said customer is a data product. Right? This is where we start. And then we said, okay, so let's look at the other aspects as well. We need to understand how we are doing our fiduciary duties right, and how are we how are we managing our expectations from the regulatory aspect? So that part, particularly that reporting part for us was a use case, and this eventually turned out to be a data product. So I know we went a little bit top down, but it was also because we had already plugged in the bottom part, right? So in terms of how the sources come in, the data domains, we already had kind of like a grasp on it, and we just wanted to connect the entire thing together. And for us, that's also what makes data products unique, right? Because now you start going through this entire supply chain, just like you said about very nice story about the ginger, and then say, okay, this ginger now goes to 3 different places. So every time customer has an interaction with us, cancels a product, buys a new product. Now I need to start thinking from this perspective of this particular engagement is also used in my reporting, is also used in my customer insights, and it's also used in my AI models, which is used to do many things, including improving customer conversions or upselling, cross-selling, or whatever it is. So this was the way that we looked at it, and we are currently still looking at it. It's a journey. I can't say that we really implemented them, so because we are on this path, but very excited about how we are going in that direction.
And what do you expect from that, in terms of benefits?
The biggest benefit that we expect is that now we have a very clearly defined, so that's where we go into this whole data as a product. Right now we have a data product called customer, and anybody who wants to use this data product, irrespective of whether somebody who's reporting in terms of customer satisfaction or something like that, or want to create models which improves things for the customer, or want to understand how our products are being sold across multiple geographies and across what kind of customer demographics, they are all users for this one particular data product called customer.
Right.
And they can all use it, and we have clearly defined documents, data catalog, and we have SLAs in terms of how they can use it. So exactly what you said, right? So once we start having adoption of this as a customer product across multiple of these segments, we start thinking from the perspective of, sure, but when do they need the data? Is that daily? Is that real time? And how do we ensure that this happens? And how do we ensure that this happens with good quality?
And I guess it all comes down with adoption, because you make it easier and better and with less effort possible to consume data and innovate with data and use it also for analytics and data-driven decision making. So I guess there's sort of a point where you sort of need to adopt such a paradigm to create value at scale efficiently. And I guess for which kind of companies would you say, or what kind of adoption would it not be the right point in time, where you would say, or do you think data as a product is something that is adoptable already as a smaller company, if you're starting off a startup or you're a young scale up, or if you are an established company, but you have only that central data warehouse and a first data lake? Where's the point where we have enough adoption to say it's worth it to invest in data products?
For me, data product is a mindset. It's a thinking. It's a way of thinking. A lot of people, they connect the data product thinking with decentralized architecture, for example, or with other technology that is required. That's the different question. I say thinking about data as a product, you should always have this thinking. I'm going to tell you something, an analogy later on, which I really like, but let's keep this in thoughts. So data product should always be there, but on how to actually put technology in place depends on the maturity level again. You don't need that in the early days. You don't. You can have exactly the same, maybe much better results with, and I had to say it, spreadsheets, Excel. It's a really powerful tool, but you have to tell people and educate them the concept. You still can do a schema design on spreadsheets. It's nothing than a database, right? You can do all the things. You don't have to put fancy technology in place. And the analogy I wanted to say is that it's kind of like water. People have heard it. The analogy of the saying of data is like the new oil, which is kind of like old. I would always say, okay, data is like the water nowadays. Of course, everybody should have access to it. There's a different way of processing it, different maturity of processing it and receiving it, but everybody should have access to it in the right quality for the right purpose. It doesn't matter if I drink it or I use it to polish something or to wipe off something, cook some tea. Yeah. Data is then the enabler, like water, for a lot of things in life. Right. And this
very powerful analogy.
Yeah.
So I think it's also worth to dive a bit into the types of data products we can see. And Robin, any how do you approach do Do you see all data as a product? Do you treat them similarly, or do you make a distinction somehow between different types when it comes to metrics, ML, maybe stuff coming out of the source?
One of the ways that we look at it is to think from the perspective of usage archetypes. Right? So, for example, we talked about reporting already. Another archetype which we don't sometimes not give enough credit is exploratory data analytics. Right? So, before we build the data science models, we need to understand the correlation between the various things. And there's a lot of things that people do in terms of just really trying to understand the data. Right? So they will connect the dots later, but you still need to provide them with a playground in terms of understanding and seeing where the dots are. So this is a use case. So exploratory data analysis for us in terms of really understanding all the things that we have available and discovering them and connecting between them is a use case, and we want to provide and help and support this use case. So that brings us to a view that we need to have multiple products, but the products should also be able to talk to each other. There has to be some kind of interoperability aspect of it. Exactly.
Compatibility,
interoperability.
Like if you have product data, if you have customer data, they need to connect. Otherwise, you don't know.
Exactly. Right?
So what do your customers do with your products?
And then, like I said, so sales would want to understand which of these customers would also buy this other product, or marketing would want to understand how many of these customers within this demographics thing, what's the lifetime value of this particular customer, as an example. And the other part, which is an extremely important part, is that there's a parallel to it with respect to your real software products. So if you build an app, most likely there's also a data product which is connected to that app, right?
Yeah, that's what I would refer to as source data product, something coming very directly from your software application.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's actually very valuable down the stream for a lot of other data products as an input.
True.
Not necessarily though. Like a data product can also not come from software, but I mean, how do we develop software sometimes is also by accident.
Right.
If you automate something, that's also at some point evolves into a software, right? So if now exploratory analysis is happening in Jupyter Notebook maybe, right? And you use that export and import it somewhere else.
Right.
And suddenly what do you have? You have a bidirectional flow of data,
Yes.
which then can be seen as data products themselves. So I wouldn't say necessarily that every data product is connected to a software, but it can be...
Not directly, but often indirectly, because it needs to originate somewhere, I would say.
It
depends. True. Sometimes it can come out of spreadsheets, like you described. Yeah.
Well, except synthetic data maybe at some point will be...
the sources could be anything. As you said, I could do an exploratory data analysis in Excel, and I know there's some people who are doing it. We're talking about data democratization, where we say not just the people who are working on the data lake or the data warehouse, or necessarily only with SQL skills, are the people who should be exploring. Everyone in the company should be in some position to take some meaning out of the data and use it.
Fully agree.
Yeah, but what I found useful myself is to differentiate between what comes out of software systems and software teams that produce data, and the data that comes out of purely data teams. Like it's usually the more aggregated data, more curated data that often is built upon those source data products, where you take several source data products, you combine them, you refine them. What we used to do in data warehousing in the past, and today it's called data pipelines, doesn't matter. But this is a sort of a higher value kind of data often that you create out of those sources. But if the sources are sending you bad data, you have a problem. And very often what I found is that you stack those data processing on top of each other in a way that at the end you don't know how you came there. And you cannot report out and say, why is it deviating? Why do I have discrepancies in numbers? And which is not good, very often. And you might use it for machine learning, but people don't really understand how was it defined on that part of its journey. And that's coming to your value chain analogy of that data value chain. So we need to find, I think, and this is sort of the new way of thinking around data. We want to have almost like Lego, different pieces that build on top of each other, where we understand what has been happening on the way. And we want to use that, of course, with the Lego pieces that are most interesting and most widely used, and then apply those standards that you said. And I think the challenge that I found very often is when you go to the source data products, to the sources, to the software systems, they think differently than a data team. So they don't see that as their first task that they're primarily responsible for. They might be responsible for customer checkout, but not necessarily responsible for providing the data that is produced by the customer checkout, which might be very, very important for a lot of people in your company.
Yeah, this is where I go back to data contracts. Because companies, teams, people who work in tech and software, they realize, well, maybe there's more purpose behind just writing the software piece, but how does it enable downstream
Yeah.
my clients, the internal clients? And they get happiness by understanding that.
Yeah.
And this is where you just put a small agreement into place, which we can call data contracts if we want. But this actually helps a lot for teams to find the purpose, not just code or let ChatGPT code it, but what is the real purpose of my work now as an engineer? It's not about deploying faster my code onto Git, but it's actually helping my downstream teams to operate X, Y, Z and operate better.
Which touches the topic of the value of the data product, because in a way, it's not in a way, but data product means you apply product thinking to data, which means as a product manager, you need to decide, is that something that is of value or not? And is that something worth investing? Because those are the trade-off decisions that we need to make every day. Because you could also just improve the customer checkout. So when should I do what? How do I determine that value? Any insights here? Any approaches you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the data product, right? So just like any other product, let's say you're building a software product, you have a product manager, just like that for data product as well. There's a product manager, a product owner, and their job is really to ask this very existential question that you mentioned, right? So yes, we are creating a data product, but who's intended customer? What's the value? How are they going to use it? And I completely agree that in some cases, you had this really nice example of Lego, right? So you need not necessarily have to define each and every potential cases they build from this Lego pieces, but at least you need to have a very good idea about how these Lego pieces come together, right? What's your plan when it comes to some of these things coming together? And this interoperability, which we said is an important piece, the data contracts or ensuring that there is data quality is an important piece. Interestingly, so when we're talking a lot about data products in a completely different meeting with a few IT leaders, and one of them asked me that you're basically taking data mart and then packaging that into a much nicer thing, and then you're calling this as a data product. What's the difference, right? Isn't it this a data mart that you're doing? And the answer to that, yes and no, right? Yes, because of course we try to improvise on the old ideas. We're not saying that the old ideas are bad and you have to throw it away. But also no, because there's a lot of things that goes in apart from just creating a data mart. And you're really thinking about these kind of things, like you said, about data contracts. How do you ensure the quality of it? How do you ensure that it's maintained at the source and all the information through the supply chain passes along, or the interoperability or the use cases, which is completely different, is not something that you would look at when you're creating an original data mart, let's say 20 years back. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
I love that comparison, and I think there's a lot of truth in there. At the end, maybe it is very comparable to the data mart, but maybe not. And I mean, think about who created the data mart. That was definitely not somebody in a domain. Sitting in the domain, working in a software team.
Definitely not. That was definitely a data person somewhere who said that I'm going to aggregate it and then build a data mart for these some specific use cases, for sure.
So are we, in a nutshell, in data as a product, giving the ability with self-service platforms to create the data mart for others? Is that part of it? Like in simple terms, of course, there are some differences. Or would you say there's more to that?
Maybe yes. I mean, if you think back to you produce data products, you have to have ownership for that specific domain producing products. Then it's about defining ownership and defining the domains. And the domain in the end is the data mart layer where you have your assets or data assets to produce those data products with. So you own this area and you define this domain. You build this layer of different data products that you own. This could be then the data mart, like visually, and from that you can derive even more products.
Right.
This is how I can envision it, right? So maybe data mart wouldn't be, let's say, the equal as a data product, which you, of course, you can, but also a layer of defined products for a particular domain.
Fascinating, and I think the question here is also what were the changes in technology and the ongoing changes in tech. And I'm referring now more towards the data technologies. That brought us here. I mean, and that are still ongoing, and maybe the ones that are to come. Any thoughts on this? Because I think 10 years back, everyone providing a data mart when they produce data I don't think it was something that we could imagine. No, that it would have blown our minds.
Yeah, I think a lot has changed from the place where we started with this whole big data thing, where we had a speed layer and a serving layer, right? So traditionally, if you look at it 10 years back, and then I said data mart, you have a few associations that directly goes with it. First is that it's always batch, right? I know that this is a batch and that happens maybe daily, weekly, or whatever, and that it comes here. And this is not a data product, right? Because when you have to start thinking about the use cases and the SLAs and all of those things, and if I want to run AI models on top of this, right, this is probably not fast enough. So this is just an example. And second, you're completely specifically mentioning about the use cases from a purely analytical use cases, right? So I can run from data mart, I can probably run reports, I can probably run some queries, I can even probably do some exploratory analysis, but probably stops there, right? There's no way that I can take this data and connect that back into a real product which is providing some customer services, because then the data is not accurate. So one of the technology obviously that has changed a lot in the past is that these layers, multiple layers are gone, right? There's no speed layer, there's no batch layer. There might be some in some setups, but in the end, it's all one single layer, right? So a lot has changed in the past from that perspective. And the other thing, as you rightly mentioned, is the quality all the way through the supply chain. So 20 years back or 10 years back, if you call up this person, this poor data engineer who's building this data mart, and ask him, can you give me an assurance that the quality of the data, all of these things is correct, and can you trace back to where it went wrong? Unfortunately, she's going to be in trouble because there's no way for them to ensure that something like this happens.
Right.
And now we have those technologies.
And maybe you could also expand on that one. So what kind of technologies, I mean, not referring about particular vendors, but more what kind of technologies here or kind of breakthroughs you've been, or just progresses made that you've been particularly impressed of?
I think a lot of them has to do with how we rightly capture the data as a source. For example, the contracts that we have in terms of what's expected from the quality of this data, as well as the metadata that we capture along with it, right? So for every source of data that we collect now, the provider at the source, at the domain level, can now say, and I'm sure all of you are using this, where this data is sensitive, this data is, we should start marking this as customer private or privacy concept, or this data is, this is masked, and so on and so forth. So it is one part where we talk about that. There's technologies on that side. The second is on the lineage. So everywhere throughout this data supply chain, you can basically track and say this is where the data was modified. So just going back to the story, so that engineer can be answering the question, well, this is exactly where it went wrong. Yeah. But I'm just scratching the surface here, right? There's a lot that has happened in terms of
plenty that happened,
data governance, cataloging, or the biggest, I think, breakthrough in the past has been automation in terms of data cataloging and data documentation, because without that, it's very difficult for a lot of people, especially people who are not part of data engineering, to be really understanding the data that's produced by a lot of domains.
Agree. I think a major breakthrough has been in the past 5 to 10 years, really the adoption of public cloud, actually.
Yeah.
I know that, for digital native companies, maybe that was always the case, although, not everyone started off in the cloud, let's put it this way. And I think with the cloud, we had the opportunity for everyone to open up their own pipelines, their own storages. Everyone can, launch an S3 bucket or an RDS or any other kind of data storages in a data warehouse with a few clicks. And then you have all these Udemy courses that teach you to use that.
I was going to say that.
I just want to, maybe I pass on to you because I think you have very important learnings here on that.
If I just take the thought process further, technology, what was it's kind of like YouTube as a provider that enabled maybe really everybody to learn how to do those things. You're in a leadership position, if you're in a individual contributor position, everybody at some point, and this is what I say about the data community and the data education piece, right? If everybody still keeps talking about those content, eventually people will get it.
Yes. Yeah. Great. I think we discussed really, really powerful things here. And I think, we should not underestimate how important the aspects of education culture change and creating evangelists is for adopting the data as a product paradigm. Because this is really where you want the different business domains taking accountability for the data they share and adopting practices. So I think that's why I think it was very valuable to discuss today, not only, what data as a product is and why it is important, and what kind of concepts are behind it. I loved, the examples of, of your ginger that goes through the value chain and the different attributes that you attach throughout the journey, and you manage the data quality and the data documentation. But also at the end, it's about people and adopting those practices, and that's why education, training, and managing upwards is so important.
The glue.
The glue.
Yes.
The glue. So really, really powerful. I think we had a great session on data management, on data as a product, on data culture today. And I think it also shows that it's a topic that will stay top of the data leader agenda for a long, long time. What do you think?
Yeah, and let's maybe add for next time topics like AI to it.
Great,
Just
great
think about
idea.
it.
And thinking about
I
AI
heard
coaching.
mentions of ChatGPT at least 2
Yeah.
times, and I guess, yeah.
So what is your take for data leaders on ChatGPT? Last question.
I guess that probably should go to the next podcast.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Wonderful. So thank you for joining Data Masterclass, our podcast, and we are excited to actually discuss next time on AI and what ChatGPT means for data leaders. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Data Masterclass series. You can fast-track your journey to data mastery by joining our 3 days immersive training event Data Masterclass Europe 2023 at www.datamasterclass.eu. Borek Data Masterclass, where great data journeys begin.